Daily protests sweep across Bahrain despite a heavy-handed crackdown by security forces.
They're afraid of Shia. I mean, I can't help it. I born a Shia. My oppressed nation are Shia.
As high-profile leaders and activists remain in jail, the government intensifies its attack on the opposition.
He was slapped and punched. They threatened to electrocute him.
We've just come back to the scene of the protests. Now, we believe the police are still in the area. The roads are basically full of these tear gas canisters.
Many foreign journalists are denied access to the kingdom, so I entered as a tourist to investigate how the regime is clamping down on its citizens. In 2011, Bahrain had its own uprising, but it was violently put down by the authorities. Events in the country were and still go largely unreported. I'm curious to know what the current situation is, so I've decided to go to Bahrain to see for myself. I was slightly nervous as the plane took off, as a lot of risk was involved, not only for myself, but for those helping me in Bahrain. If caught, the situation for my contacts could be dire, including arrests and detention. Bahrain is a tiny island in the Persian Gulf, where a Shia majority are ruled by a Sunni minority, and the ruling Al Khalifa family enjoys good relations with its Western allies. Inspired by the Arab uprisings at the time, Bahrainis, both Sunni and Shia, marched to the now demolished Pearl Roundabout, protesting against the Al Khalifa family's monopoly on all power. But this was short-lived, as the Bahraini authorities invited Saudi troops into the country to help crush the demonstrations. Many protesters were killed and hundreds were jailed. In the 4 years since, things are different. Demonstrations have been banned in the country, but the movement hasn't gone away. Although not as large as before, protests still continue on a daily basis in several villages across the country, and often end in clashes with the security forces.
90% of activists are behind bar, and the left are left in exile, and maybe very few, maybe I'm one of very few people who remain outside jail, who spent more than 2 years in jail. But majority are in jail, so you have to take that into consideration, not as strong as before. Violence used by government, repression, people were targeted in their life, in their living, in their economy, in their school, in their work, in their jobs.
Nabil Rajab is a prominent human rights activist. He was recently given a 6-month sentence for tweeting against the authorities. He's been arrested and detained in the past for protesting.
Great majority of the protesters are Shia. Why they are Shia? Because they are the marginalized group. They are the target of government discrimination and repression. So that's why they are ahead of any movement or revolution.
My first stop was a funeral procession for Abdul Karim al-Bazri, an elderly man killed in an unidentifiable bomb blast in Karzakhan village earlier in the week. I was told the event would be followed by a protest rally against the regime. Clashes are expected to take place and police have already closed off entry to the village. They are all over the place, they're armed, it's very difficult to go outside. The closer I got to the area, the heavier the police presence became. His death had sparked several clashes between protesters and the police just a few days back. On my right-hand side here is a supermarket. Now, the police have dismantled the security cameras all around. Villagers informed me the police had previously attacked them from opposite the supermarket and were planning to do the same today. They had removed the security cameras to eradicate any evidence of this. I joined the funeral procession disguised as a local to avoid raising any suspicion. Soon after, the demonstration began, and as expected, it ended in clashes with security forces. Any gathering with more than 5 people is considered illegal, and many here could face arrest. According to current statistics, 3,000 people have already been arrested and detained for participating in rallies. The police continuously fired tear gas at us, but the protesters remained defiant. The tear gas instantly burnt my eyes, nose and throat, making it very difficult to breathe. One of the protesters told me he would rather get shot than endure tear gas on a daily basis. A US-based human rights group has accused the Bahraini authorities of weaponizing tear gas. Physicians for Human Rights said the continuous use of the substance against civilians by the security forces was unprecedented in the 100-year history of its use throughout the world.
Tear gas is happening on a nightly basis in the villages. And it is, you see the tear gas is used either from far, or sometimes you see some trucks, they put it inside the houses directly. It is used as a tool, not against the gathering. It's sometimes used as a killing tool towards the people who's protesting, or towards the people who are inside their houses, only because they are from the village.
The report went on to say the use of tear gas was maiming, blinding and killing people. Yusuf Badar is a victim of one such attack. He lost his eye after police violently attacked a memorial event he had organised for his son Ali Badar.
خرجنا في نفس هذا التاريخ للمطالبة. وصلنا إلى قريب من تمركز اللي هو قوات الشغب. ضغطونا بطلقات عشوائي، بشكل عشوائي وبشكل على الوجه، على الأجسام. يعني الغرض ليس تفريق المتظاهرين، الغرض إصابة المتظاهرين، الغرض إن أي واحد يخرج مرة ثانية بيكون مصيره نفس الشهيد، ومصيركم ترى أنتم أي متظاهر بيكون نفس المصير، وإحنا متعمدين الضرب بالشكل على الجسم. فصادتني من كثر اللي هو طلق الغاز مسيل الدموع، صادتني واحدة في الوجه، سقط في نفس، فقدت عيني. فالحمد لله يعني مع فقداني للعين إلا أن هذا.
During the uprisings in 2011, 16-year-old Ali was crushed to death by a police vehicle, which repeatedly pinned him against the wall.
كانت مسيرة سلمية، يعني احنا خرجنا تقريبا أكثر من 500 فرد بكل سلمية، نحمل الأعلام، أعلام البحرين، نحمل ورود، نحمل شعاراتنا المطالبة بالحرية بالعدالة، ما كانت فيها أي عنف.
Badr told me security forces had attacked the protests without any warning.
أنا الله سبحانه وتعالى كاتب لي في هذا اليوم إني أنا أنصاب في عيني. لو ما انصبت أنا فخور إني انصبت في نفس التاريخ في استشهاد ابني. فخور إني أنا انصبت للمطالبة إلى جميع الشعب.
The canister fractured his cheekbone and caused irreparable damage, completely removing his left eye from the socket. Despite his injuries, he was held and interrogated for 7 days for participating in an illegal gathering. Campaigners told me security forces have used 9 times the allowable percentage of tear gas on civilians. Until recently, the UK and US had exported tear gas to Bahrain. After the attack, many streets in the village, including the residential ones, were cloaked in a cloud of tear gas.
We've just come back to the scene of the protest. Now, we believe the police are still in the area. The roads are basically full of these tear gas canisters.
I attended several demonstrations during my stay and found almost all ended with the police heavily firing tear gas, many times at close range, at both protesters and bystanders. The Physicians for Human Rights report said that several deaths had occurred as a result of tear gas being fired directly into homes and cars, and that it was mainly the Shia community who'd been victims. Abdul Aziz Al-Said is the most recent casualty who died at his home in Balad al-Qadim due to tear gas inhalation. The government dismissed the report's findings, stating that suggestions that the use of tear gas in Bahrain is severely injurious or even lethal is simply not backed up by any research or proof. Despite the government's dismissal, in recent days, footage has emerged showing a young protester being shot in the face by a tear gas canister. Many of the protests I saw during my stay took place in predominantly Shia villages. How did a movement that was once made up of both Sunnis and Shias become so polarized? And where have all the Sunni voices gone? TV journalist Faisal Hayat holds the local media partly responsible.
التلفزيون هو المسؤول عن كل عمليات التحريض والشحن الطائفي اللي صارت. يعني أنا أذكر قصص حصلت مثل قصة قطع اللسان وما إلى ذلك من قصص كانت بالدرجة الأولى مؤثرة في الطرف الموالي، تركت عنده إحساس أنه تحت التهديد، فبالتالي ذنب التلفزيون لا يغتفر.
Bahrain government built an apartheid system. Apartheid means separating Shias and Sunni. Buy a house in some area where government don't want Shia to stay. You can't build a mosque in majority of the country for Shia. In fact, they have demolished a lot of mosques. Our regime is trying to present the case as it's a Shia Sunni, but it's very clear to us not to get dragged into a sectarian conflict. We have a problem about human rights, about justice, about equality, about freedom for a nation who've been struggling, ruled by a dictatorship, ruled by a repressive royal family.
كثير من الطرفين خسروا علاقات بعض. يعني ما راح أبالغ إذا قلت إن في هناك أسر وعائلات تفككت بسبب الموضوع المذهبي وموضوع الطائفي. إن الشرخ الطائفي أثر داخل في صميم الأسرة البحرينية. لا زال الكثير من الناس يتعاملون بشيء من التحفظ والحذر مع الطرف الآخر، وهو ما لم يكن موجود. حاليا صعب أن نشوف زيجات مختلطة بين السنة والشيعة بسبب الظرف اللي نعيشه، الظرف السياسي اللي دخلت فيه الطائفية وكل الأمراض اللي تأثر فيها المجتمع.
I was told that many Shias felt let down by their Sunni countrymen. I was keen to get the Sunni perspective, but due to the high risk factor of being reported to the authorities, I was unable to do so. Also, my cameraman told me he was afraid to film in Sunni towns and feared the worst if we got caught. As protests continue to grip the country, I wanted to know what the underlying issues are that lead to Shias feeling marginalised and frustrated. So I went to meet Sheikh Ali Salman, the leader of the main opposition group, Al-Wafaq.
توظيف حتما، فممكن يكون دكتور ولكن بلا وظيفة، أو يكون بوظيفة دنيا. النظام مصمم بحيث أن الشيعة يمارسون الوظائف الدنيا كالناسين، عمال. الوظائف العليا أصبحت النظام يدفع إليها أشخاص آخرين، أما من أبناء الطائفة السنية الكريمة أو يستجلب أجانب.
Not all Shias in Bahrain suffer from economic hardships. There are some prominent Shia business owners, such as the Jawads, but they've been targeted in their own way. Here you can see thugs backed by the police attacking a supermarket they own. Despite the majority of the country's indigenous population belonging to the Shia faith, Sheikh Salman told me of the severe obstacles they face in practicing their religion. After the revolution, several mosques were demolished, and getting permission to build new ones is proving difficult.
من حصول على مأتم في منطقة الرفاع الشرقي يسكن عدد منهم. في منطقة عراد الجديدة يمنعون من الحصول على مأتم. عدد مساجدهم في مدينة حمد هناك قرابة 40 مسجد للسنة، هناك قرابة 10 مساجد فقط إلى الشيعة. في منطقة السيف حاولوا أن يبنوا لهم مسجد، منعوا من بنائه حتى الآن رغم استمرارهم في المحاولة 10 سنوات بأرض من عندهم. هم يعانون من هذه الممارسات ويعتقلون لخطاب يوم الجمعة، يستجوبون ويعتقلون لخطابات المنبر الحسيني.
He went on to mention that tens of thousands of Sunni foreigners had also been naturalized in order to tip the demographic balance. At the same time, the regime has introduced laws that strip citizens of their citizenship, leaving them stateless. To date, over 70 people have had their citizenship revoked, including lawyer Timur Karimi. Campaigners say the revoking of citizenship is being used as a tool to silence activists and those opposing the regime. Timur told me he was neither affiliated to any political party nor was he politically active.
أولا أنا كنت محامي أشتغل وقانون المحاماة لا يجيز للغير بحريني اشتغال بالمهنة المحاماة وكان هاي مصدر رزقي الوحيد وفي الظروف اللي كان عندي أولادي 3 في الجامعة أنا كنت أنفق عليهم خارج البحرين أنا كنت أنفق عليهم غير من زوجتي كانت مريضة عندها سرطان وكانت تعالج يعني في ظروف انسحبت جنسيتي ووقفوها عن العمل يعني في ظروف قاسية كنت وما زلت.
As the crackdowns increase, many families are publicly demanding justice for their killed sons. A number of fathers of martyrs protest on a nightly basis in their villages and find themselves being targeted and persecuted. Maki Taki is a father of 23-year-old Mahmoud Taki, who was amongst the first casualties of the revolution.
With my family, of course, they come the same others on the blacklist. They kick out from the work without any reason. My son, my daughter, 3 of my son, real estate, they closing my office, want me to stop and cancel my case about my son. They take me on the jail also.
He told me many of the fathers are frequently arrested without being given any reason and are forced to sign documents that result in them being charged.
They slapped me, but they told me, you have to choose. We have a big bottles to sit in, and we have a churches by electric. We have also a big hose, and we have 2 big guide to rape you, or take your daughter to bring her here.
Police brutality is a common occurrence in Bahrain. According to Human Rights Watch, despite pledges of reform, the police continue to beat and torture civilians, including minors.
Tens of houses on a daily basis being attacked, money being stolen, valuable item being stolen by those police institutions and police personnel who been brought from outside the country. And it is very ugly thing when you see your country, your nation are suppressed by people who were brought from outside.
The police system is made up of mainly naturalized people from Jordan, Syria, Pakistan and Yemen, almost all of whom belong to the Sunni community. The Bahrain Center for Human Rights has accused the security forces of even militarizing hospitals and preventing people from getting medical treatment.
We have thousands of people living and the pellets in their bodies from the shotgun, and they can't even go to remove it. They're afraid government will. Thousands of people. We have tens of people who lost their eyes because they were shot in the eye. And we treated them at home because if they go to hospital, they're going to be arrested.
Police checkpoints are also heavily deployed around the entry and exit points of many Shia villages. As I drove from the capital Manama towards the villages, the more and more it felt like entering areas that were under occupation.
ممكن عبر أي زيارة راح تشوف أن هناك نقاط عسكرية في أغلب القرى الشيعية. هنا راح تشوف نقطة تفتيش لمدخل البلاد، هذه نقطة ثابتة، وهناك نقاط متحركة ممكن توضع ليلة الجمعة أو ليلة السبت اللي هي تكثر، أو نقاط توضع في أي وقت من الأوقات. هذه النقاط ممكن أن يعني تستوقف السيارة، ممكن تطلب يعني هوية تعريف، ممكن أن تقوم بضربك، ممكن أن تقوم باعتقالك، وهذا حدث إلى الكثيرين من المواطنين. فالقرى الشيعية، البيوت الشيعية تتعرض إلى المداهمة بمعدل على الأقل 10 بيوت يوميا. قد يصل المعدل إلى 20 و30 في بعض الليالي، ولكن معدل 10 بيوت ليليا.
In addition to the checkpoints and foot patrols, helicopters buzz overhead around Shia villages day and night. They film and monitor the residents below. so throughout my stay I had to ensure my camera was constantly concealed, hence making filming outside a very difficult task.
It is very common when I sit with somebody in the coffee shop and, you know, we're whispering what we're talking to each other. We give the nicknames and try to hide what we're saying. We are always the same. We are walking and sometimes you're thinking somebody's following you. You don't feel safety anywhere, especially in public places, a cafe shop or something. No, you can't feel safe.
Children are also being routinely detained, ill-treated and tortured in Bahrain, according to human rights groups. Most children have been arrested on suspicion of participating in so-called illegal gatherings, rioting and throwing Molotov cocktails.
We have seen people up to 8 to 10 being detained.
And they get tortured?
Of course they have been tortured, and the judges themselves have seen a lot of sign of torture in their bodies, because the juvenile, when he's arrested, normally he won't go to the juvenile center. He will go to the police station, where he will be tortured and forced to confess.
Such was the case for a young boy from his village who was arrested from his house and falsely accused of participating in a demonstration.
They took him into the police station. They give him a Molotov cocktail bottle and they photograph him. And he's charged now of holding or having a Molotov cocktail and using them against police. They want to put as much as juvenile or children in jail.
He went on to tell me that many of the children are kept in adult detention facilities and the government forces have detained at least 200 children to date.
I've come to Sanabis to meet one of the youngest political prisoners of the revolution who was detained for apparently throwing Molotov cocktails.
Jihad al-Samir, now 11, was 10 years old at the time. He was given a 2-year sentence, of which he has spent 6 months in detention.
I will not exaggerate if I tell you each and every Shia family in Bahrain have at least one person who's been killed or tortured or in exile or in detention.
Still affected by his detention, Jihad was scared to speak to me, so I spoke to his father instead.
There was a march here in Sanabis and they arrested him during that. He was charged for attacking police and being in possession of Molotov cocktails. They beat him upon detaining him. He was slapped and punched. They threatened to electrocute him. At the beginning they treated them really badly. In the first 2 days he was in solitary confinement. He's a child. Of course he was afraid.
His father told me that his son had responded to all the accusations with tears.
You know, a child so innocent. See the way he's even shy to talk to you and to me. And imagine a guy like this. They will charge him on violence or on attacking police.
With worsening conditions and little in the way of reform, the people of Bahrain vow to continue with their struggle.
قامت نظام إنساني ديمقراطي يراعي مصالح جميع البحرينيين من الخليفة ومن الشيعة ومن السنة، هو طريق البحرين إلى التقدم والتحديث والاستقرار. الاستمرار في النظام القبلي لم يعد ممكن ولم يعد مقبول، وهو كان مصدر إلى المشاكل دائما وسيستمر في مصدر إلى المشاكل الأمنية والاقتصادية، والبحرين تحتاج إلى الاستقرار وتعاون جميع أبنائها. إلى هذا الشعب الكريم المطالبة بالحقوق عملية ضرورية على أن تستمر بطريقة سلمية وصولا إلى حقوقنا في مواطنة متساوية ودولة ديمقراطية.
Just days after giving me this interview, Sheikh Ali Salman was arrested and put on trial. The authorities have accused him of promoting political change using illegal forceful means, charges he firmly denies. His detention has led to a wave of anger sweeping across the country.
Now the change comes in my time or comes in my son's time. The defeat when I decide to stop. The defeat when my people start to stop and surrender. The victory when we are in the street and continue our struggle. And we are in the street and we are continuing our street. So will I'm going to see the change or not never comes in my mind. Never important to me, as much as we have to keep fighting for the change.
Positioned between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Bahrain has always been of strategic importance to the West. And it's the only state in the Persian Gulf where a Sunni monarchy rules over a Shia majority. Once a British protectorate, it gained independence in 1971, and since then, the ruling Al Khalifa family has enjoyed close defence ties with Britain. It's nearly 50 years since Britain formally left the Middle East. It will now return to the region to establish its first permanent military base in the Mina Salman port area, which is also home to the US Navy's 5th Fleet.
Your security is our security. Your prosperity is our prosperity. Your stability is our stability. I was delighted last night to sign a memorandum of understanding with His Excellency Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa in the presence of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. That arrangement will put the long-standing presence of the Royal Navy in Bahrain on a permanent footing.
The deal signed at a security conference in the country's capital Manama hasn't been welcomed by everyone. Demonstrations broke out across Bahrain to denounce the plans, with protesters demanding the expulsion of Ian Lindsay, Britain's ambassador to Bahrain.
The Bahraini people are really is very, very angry, and I think we have seen big demonstrations in Sitra, for example. The biggest one was in Sitra, against the base, against the British new policy. The first reason was about the timing. They announced about the base at the time of the failure of the negotiations. They announced about the base where no political reforms, no human rights reforms. Number two, the cost of the base was from the Bahraini budget. Third, without taking any opinion from the Bahraini people.
Bahrain's ruling family received heavy criticism for the way it violently cracked down on protesters who were demanding reform and social equality in 2011. In the years since, crackdowns and imprisonment of activists has continued. Campaigners say that Bahrain's human rights record has further regressed. Despite these turbulent events, the British government entered into negotiations to construct the base.
In October 2012, the UK and Bahrain did sign a memorandum of understanding on defence cooperation. Again, that was at a time when the crackdown was very clearly continuing and human rights situation in Bahrain was continuing to worsen. But talks about military cooperation have continued regardless.
The £15 million cost of building the base will be paid by Bahrain, with the UK covering ongoing costs. The British authorities have said the base is there to address threats to regional security.
Of course, is nothing. In terms of military equipment, is nothing comparing with the American base. I think it is a political message. The government of Britain is to send a political message not just to Bahrain, it is to the GCC countries that we are here supporting you as long you are supporting our interest, talking about the oil. So it is a political message.
The political situation in Bahrain intensified following the brutal crushing of the Pearl Roundabout protests. On the 17th of February, security forces launched a pre-dawn raid to clear the area. Hundreds were injured and several killed. The day became known as Bloody Thursday. Witnesses said there was no warning given prior to the attack, in which the forces used tear gas and fired bird shots at protesters.
In the lead up to the Pearl Roundabout protests, the February 2011 protests in Bahrain, the UK was licensing equipment including tear gas, assault rifles, aircraft cannon, sniper rifles. Much of that equipment was of the same sort that was later used against protesters, unarmed protesters.
The protests continued for a number of weeks, but after an unsuccessful attempt at national dialogue, the Bahraini government invited Saudi troops into the country and declared a 3-month state of national emergency. The Pearl Roundabout was eventually cleared and demolished.
These were vehicles that entered Bahrain to support Bahraini troops in putting down the peaceful protests. They were manufactured by BAE Systems and made in Newcastle here in the UK and exported to Saudi Arabia with the full support and permission of the UK government. The Foreign Secretary William Hague at the time was actually notified of Saudi Arabia's intention to enter Bahrain with these vehicles before it happened, and the UK government did nothing to prevent that intervention. Not only did it not prevent it, it continued then to license parts for the maintenance of those vehicles even while they were still in occupation in Bahrain.
Mass arrests, detentions and trials before military courts soon followed. Critics say the British government did little to pressure the Bahraini authorities to ease the crackdown. There was a temporary pause in the export of equipment, but very quickly business resumed between the two countries.
Western government, specifically I speak about UK, speak two languages. One about human rights, justice for inside, but when it comes to outside, it's interest. Priority are their interests. Many time in many area, interests have a conflict with the values and moral values and human rights. So they choose to go with their interest and against those values they're being talking about inside their country. And this is what happened in Bahrain.
We did a comparison looking at the 2.5 years before February 2011 and found that the UK had licensed approximately £6 million worth of weapon sales to Bahrain in that period. After that, we should have seen a change in approach from the UK. We should have seen a reduction in arms sales. Instead, we've seen the opposite picture, and arms sales in the 2.5 years since actually increased to 16 million. And now they're about 25 million.
We questioned the Foreign Office on their ongoing arms trade with Bahrain, but they refused to comment. In the 4 years since the pro-democracy movement began, scores of people, including political leaders, activists and protesters, have been arrested. Amongst those arrested was prominent human rights lawyer Mohammed Al-Tajir. In April 2011, he was arrested without a warrant by a group of over 20 masked security officers. He was brought before a military court without a formal charge and without his attorney being notified.
When they sent me to the military jail, Al Crane, they told me you went to the Pira roundabout and you give a speech which include incitement to the regime. And they said it is illegal gathering also, being there for 3 weeks. And based on that, they wanted me to confess against the other lawyers. And I know that there were planned to put around 40 lawyers, the same as the doctors, in jail.
The country has 4 main prisons. According to the Bahrain Center of Human Rights, over 60% of those detained reported being tortured. The use of torture since the uprising has been described by many human rights groups as being widespread and systematic.
It is a daily business where you whenever they open the cell, you have to stand, you have to face the wall, you have to rest your hand for very long hours until they finish from the others. And some guards standing by near your cell. If you try to turn, if you try to move your hand, they will come and beat you. And there were around 8 personnel. Most of them work in the military police, where their main job is to torture, with dogs coming with them, sometimes with very long sticks, beating you all over from here till down, till you collapse and faint. Again, they will throw water in you, or they will wake you up. They will continue until they feel that you can't continue, or you might be hurt, or you might die. And actually, in that period, 5 lives lost in jails.
His case attracted a great deal of international attention. With ongoing pressure from various non-governmental bodies, he was eventually released. But the charges against him were never dropped. Al-Tajir was forced to sign a paper saying he wouldn't participate in actions against the country. But in spite of this, he has continued with his work, including attending a human rights conference in Geneva.
The reprisal actually reached its maximum extent when they released the CD for me with my wife in the bed, which was taken by the surveillance camera.
In June 2011, King Hamad set up the Bahraini Independent Commission of Inquiry to look into the events following the uprising. The report criticised the security forces for its heavy use of force. King Hamad promised to implement reforms based on the findings, but human rights groups say very little has been done. Britain has been accused of turning a blind eye to the regime's atrocities.
Actually, Britain form a kind of unique ally to Bahrain, and we are afraid that one day they will say, oh, we are one family with the British. And you see, there are no standard between these two allies. And it's true that the British is looking at Bahrain as one of its colony where they don't want to leave, and they don't want to see any kind of change to a better situation for Bahrainis.
As part of the reform process, the authorities recruited Britain's John Yates, the former Assistant Metropolitan Police Commissioner, as an advisor to the Ministry of Interior.
Under these slogans, they have been involved in different aspects. Of course, they brought Mr. John Yates to improve, to make more reforms in police. But if you put this in questions, honestly, there is no improvement.
This training the UK government been talking about is just to mislead the UK public opinion and UK Parliament, who don't know what is going on here. UK has played a very negative role in here. And it's not about the training, about the political will, which does not exist here. Political will. There are a nation, oppressed nation, fighting for struggle, fighting for democracy in here.
Bahrain's police force is made up of mainly naturalized Sunni citizens brought in from Yemen, Jordan, Syria and Pakistan. Human rights campaigners say the security forces have continued to terrorize protesters using excessive force against them.
Our police made me in a sectarian basis, made of one sect attacking another sect on a daily basis. That's the main problem. Bahraini government bringing mercenaries from outside, they calling them police. According to the international law, they're mercenaries. They bringing them to suppress their nation, to be using them for the crackdown against the struggle of people fighting for democracy. This is itself is against the international law, against the humanity.
Violent repression isn't something that's new in Bahrain. Along with systematic torture, it was a recurring feature of British political rule in the country.
In 1966, that was 5 years before the British left, the then political agent in Bahrain, the late Sir Anthony Parsons, had brought into the country someone called Ian Henderson, who was a veteran of the Mau Mau rebellion in Africa in the 50s, and he gave him the duty of establishing the special branch. Now that special branch was responsible for a lot of human rights violations, including institutionalized torture.
Some Bahrainis referred to Ian Henderson as the butcher of Bahrain. Human rights groups accused him of routinely sanctioning the use of torture and at times torturing detainees with his own hands.
Ian Henderson had also under him several colonels and officers who continued to mistreat the people until today.
Henderson remained head of the security apparatus until 1999. Scotland Yard launched an inquiry into the allegations in 2000. The investigation was dropped the following year. Henderson denied involvement in torture, dismissing the allegations as being politically motivated. In 2014, Great British Week in Bahrain was put on by the British Embassy to celebrate what organisers described as 200 years of friendship and strong bilateral relations.
Its big focus for the last couple of years has been trying to secure sales for BAE's Eurofighter Typhoon. That would be a big deal for BAE Systems. maybe not the people here in the UK, and certainly not for the people in Bahrain. There's been an enormous amount of political effort devoted to trying to secure that deal, including visits from royalty, visits from to and from David Cameron, lots of UK ministers travelling out to Bahrain to try and make that deal. It's not just looking to buy UK warplanes, it's buying the UK's silence on its human rights abuses.
But this was just one event in a long line of initiatives taken to strengthen the ties between the two countries. Britain also hosted the Al Khalifa family at various events, including a promotional conference in London. But these celebrations are a far cry from the experience of many Bahraini citizens. In September of last year, the Ismail family received a call from the Salmania hospital, informing them that their 23-year-old son Naji had been injured. Upon arriving at the hospital, they learnt from a policeman that he had passed away.
We gather all the family and they come, we go to see him. And before we see him, they said, you must sign a paper that if you see him, you will not issue case for the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Interior. I said for this one, the man, why I must sign? I must see him first, then I will sign. He said, you will not see him after you sign first.
Eventually his sister gave in and signed the document, and they were allowed to see Naji. They were told he'd been killed in an accident, but the family strongly questions this account and instead believes he suffered a similar fate to his brother Ahmed, a videographer who was shot by unidentified men documenting a protest 2 years earlier. Witnesses claimed the men he had been shot by were from the security forces but were dressed in plain clothes.
And after when I removed the sheet in his chest, I see the big hole and there is nothing and I can't see his body from inside.
What did they do to your brother?
We think that he shoot.
And why did they do this to him?
He's complete what Ahmed do for documentation on the marches and what is happening, and he visiting the injured people every night, and he keep documentation with the other parties.
So were they ever targeting your brother beforehand?
Yes,
What were they doing?
They treat him that if you complete what you're doing as your brother, you will go as the same way. The same way that Ahmed go, you will go the same way.
And they said this to him?
Yes.
His sister said the authorities had tried to infiltrate their home on a number of occasions.
Only they send some of the CID at home as a friend and sometimes as a citizen journalist, and sometimes like you, a journalist. They want to make with him an interview about his brother Ahmed. And ladies or gentlemen, female or male, they come in at house like this. I think it's too hard, but we can't face it because we have the camera. After Ahmed, no fear. The fear is gone. If you face it one time, you can face it 2 and 3 and 4. Because you didn't have any more things to fear about it. What you fear about the kill, about murders, or about what they will hold the weapons, they will kill you or something. It's easy.
Bahraini exiles living in the UK say they've also come under attack, with many claiming they were targeted by a software called Finfisher. Created and sold by a UK-based surveillance company, Gamma International, the technology promises remote monitoring and key logging, as well as claiming to monitor Skype calls in real time. Saeed al-Shahabi, a prominent opposition figure, has lived in the UK for 4 decades, after being sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia by Bahraini authorities. He is one of the activists who was reportedly monitored by this software.
Hackers managed to get a log of the conversation between that company, between the officials, the technicians of that company of Gamma, and the security officers in Bahrain who were not able to operate the program efficiently. Later, we were also told that 3 computers have been positively identified belonging to myself and 2 other colleagues So we know that for sure that our privacy in UK has been violated by a foreign government, by a foreign intelligence service.
A watchdog group called Privacy International has filed a formal complaint against Gamma International with the National Crime Agency in the UK. Shahabi told me the attacks were not just limited to hacking their computers.
Some of my colleagues were targeted, were attacked in the street, were beaten up. 2 days later, my house was arsoned, and there was a fire at the middle of the night, about 3:30 in the morning, to rush outside the house, at the steps of the house, and extinguish the fire that, and you could smell the petrol.
He told me that along with other exiles, he has continued with his activism, frequently organising events and demonstrations, much to the anger of the Bahraini authorities, and he felt the attacks could be linked to this, though he had no proof.
I don't have information, but the indications are it is linked in one way or another to the regime, especially 2 attacks came within 3 days of each other on opposition. You couldn't give any other explanation except that they had been planned by the regime.
Shahabi went on to express his annoyance at the UK authorities for stopping and searching Bahraini exiles under terrorism-related laws for several hours at a time at the airports.
They ask us about our attitude, where we have gone to, who did we see, who did we find, what do we think about the situation in Bahrain, what do you think of the GCC, what do you think of Palestine. It's just very general political questions that have irrelevance to the state of terrorism or security.
Philip Hammond's recent comment stating that Bahrain is travelling in the right direction, along with UK's ongoing support of the regime, has angered many Bahrainis.
In the same day that Mr. Hammond made his statement, Nabil Rajab, most prominent human rights figure in the region, was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment for a tweet. Sheikh Ali Salman, the head of political opposition, was in jail at the time when Mr. Hammond made his statement.
In the same week, Al-Wadai also found himself stateless after having his citizenship revoked.
We see British government talking in only one term when it's praising the dictators of Bahrain. When it comes to their atrocities, even when it comes to killing or torturing or any kind of red lines were crossed, we haven't seen the United Kingdom in a single statement criticizing their closest ally.
Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee has said very clearly that there is very little evidence of progress or reform in Bahrain and has urged the government repeatedly to designate Bahrain as a country of concern for its human rights record. The government has refused to do that. Instead, it has designated Bahrain as a priority market for UK arms sales.
This business that they have with our government is stained with the blood of our children, and we should not let it go easily. UK government against our struggle for democracy and human rights. UK government is against our human rights, and we will not let that happen. We will not let that go free of charge. It's going to cost them on their reputation, and we're going to make sure that does cost them in their reputation.